Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to learn about loops. And loops are very useful in any kind of programming because they allow us to reuse the same code and repeat the same code multiple times without having to rewrite it. There are two kinds of loops that we're going to look at: while loops and for loops. We're going to start with while loops because they are kind of an easier one to understand and that they're very similar to the if statements that we saw in the last video. So, let's write a while loop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a loop that is going to ask the user to type something in, look at what that is that they typed in, and exit the loop if they entered in the right thing, and keep on asking them to enter something in until they enter that thing in. So basically it's going to repeat and repeat until they enter the correct thing in. Let's start off with, maybe we'll say they're guessing a code. So I'm going to say, I'm going to make a code, and that code is going to be secret code, just like that. Not a very good code, but doesn't matter. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create another variable, because we do need another variable for this to hold on to their input. We'll call it the user guess. And we're not going to give it any information right now because the user hasn't guessed anything. We just need this variable to exist so that when we get input, we can assign it to it. So that's our starting point. Now let's actually write our loop. So this is going to be a while loop. And as you could probably guess, it starts off with while. After that, we do round brackets. And just like the if statement, where we put a condition that brackets, like if this is true, run this code, we put in a condition and say, if this is true, keep running this code. Okay? So we're going to say, while the code is not equal to the user guess. Like this. We're going to say, keep on doing it and while these two don't match. And right now they don't match. If they did match, then this wouldn't happen at all. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to ask the user to type in a code. So let's do a constant. Actually, we need to do a prompt. So we're going to say user guess equals prompt. What is the secret code? Just like that. And yeah, let's just keep it at this. That's all we really need. And so it's going to keep us asking for us for the secret code. It's going to assign it to our user guess variable. And then when it gets to the end of the loop, which is where this bracket is, it's going to go back to the beginning and check, hey, is this still true? If it is still true, it's going to do this again. But if it's not true, then it's going to stop. And we'll even write a little bit of code here to say that it stopped. We'll say correct. Just like that. And so that's going to be how we know that it came to the end. Let's try it out. So I'm going to run the program. It's asking, what is the secret code? I'm going to give it the wrong code. Let's do, say, 1, 2, 3, 4. Press enter. And it's doing it again. It's repeating this code. I give it a different code. What is secret code? Still repeating. But now if I give it the correct code, which is secret code, just like that, it stops the loop and tells me it's correct. Why it stopped? Because it's saying do this while these two don't match. But when I typed in the correct secret code, these match. So this condition is now false. And if this is false, it's going to move on to the next piece of code. Okay? So that is what a while loop is. Very similar to an if statement. But rather than only running it once, it keeps on running it as long as that condition is true. However, if for some reason these two were already true, equal to each other, so this was false, it would not ask for anything at all. So what if I do make them equal right away? In this case, this is false because they are in fact equal to each other in this case. So it's going to skip all this and it's just going to say correct. Let's take a look. There we go. So it didn't even run this code because the first time it checked, it was false, so it skipped it. Okay? And that is a while loop in a nutshell. Reason why you use a while loop is when you don't know how many times you need to loop before you need to move on to the next thing. We use a while loop in this case because we don't know how many times the user needs to guess until they get the correct answer. So that would be a good reason why you use a while loop. The next kind of loop is called a for loop, and the for loop is used when you do know how many times you want to loop. So, for example, maybe you're making a guessing game where they get 3 guesses. You might want to loop the whole guessing section of code 3 times, and that would be a good idea to use a for loop so that they only get the 3 guesses, the most they get. Let's take a look at how a for loop works. A for loop is a little more complicated, but it also allows you a lot of flexibility in what you can do with it. So we're going to do a for loop. As you'd expect, it starts off with a for. Then we do round brackets, and inside the brackets are going to be 3 things. The first thing is we're going to create a new variable called the looping variable, and we're going to assign it a starting value. And it's always going to be a number, a whole number, an integer. So we're going to say, I'm going to use let here. We'll also see what the difference between let and var is at this point. So for pretty much everything, let and var have been the same, but there's a small difference here. And we'll explore that as well. So I'm going to say let I equal 0. So create a new variable called I and set it equal to 0. This is one of the few cases where using a single letter variable is actually acceptable. It is standard for using I as a looping variable in for loops. You don't have to, and it can often be a better choice to call it something else, but in many cases, that is a fine thing. Next, we do a semicolon, and after the semicolon, we should keep on looping this while our new variable meets some condition. So I'm going to say while I is less than 10. And finally, we do another semicolon. And the last thing we do is say how does our variable change when we go through this loop once. And most commonly, we say we want our variable to increase by 1. We can do that by doing 2 plus signs. That means add 1 to it. We can also do plus equals 1. Both of them mean the same thing. It's like increase this variable by 1. I'm going to do it the standard way, but we're going to explore this a little bit because there are different ways that we can change this in order to get different effects. So that is the entire for statement. And as with another if statements and loops, we open up brackets and then we write the code that we want to run when this is looping. So I'm going to do a console log, and I'm going to do a formatted string, and I'm just going to print out what is the value of I. I'm going to say the value of I is I. And that's just going to print out what is this I every time we loop through it. And what it's going to do is going to loop 10 times. Every time it goes through, it's increasing by 1, and it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then it's going to stop. Let's take a look. There we go. The value of I is 0. End of loop. Go back to the beginning. I is 1. I is less than 10. So it continues until 9. Then after that, it increases by 1. I is now 10. 10 is not less than 10, so the loop stops. Okay? So we can do other things like instead of counting up, we can have it count down. So maybe I want to start from 10, and I want to continue while I is greater than 0. And if I want to count down, I need to do minus minus, just like this. If we do plus plus, that's actually going to cause a problem. In fact, it's going to result in what's called an infinite loop. Because it start at 10, keep on counting up, and as long as it keeps on counting up, it's always going to be bigger than 10. Let's see what happens. See, it just keeps on going, and it's not going to stop. Because no matter how many times it loops, I is always going to be bigger than 0. So we got to close this, and we'll fix that. Rather than doing plus plus for add 1, we'll do minus minus to subtract 1. And run it again. Now I'll just bring this over here. And now we can see it counts down. So we can use this to create numbers counting down as well as up. We can also have it count by different value than 1. So for example, I want it to count down by 2s. To do that, I can do minus equals 2. It will start at 10. You go 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. And then it will stop at 0 because 0 is not greater than 0. Just like that. Okay? So we have these 3 things that we can change in order to change how this variable changes every time it loops through. So what does our new variable start at? When does it stop looping, or basically keep on looping while that condition is true? How does that variable change every time it loops? Okay? And we do this whenever we know how many times we need to loop. Now let's talk about this let. The difference between let and var is called scope. Scope just means where does that variable even exist inside the code. And exist is basically meaning brackets in a sense. This variable, because I use let, is only going to exist inside of this for loop. As soon as I leave the for loop, that variable stops existing. So for example, if I do console log I, it's actually going to crash. It says I is not defined, which is basically a way of saying that variable doesn't exist. That's because I used let to declare it. So it only exists in between these brackets. That is what let means, is that this variable only exists inside of the brackets it was defined. However, var would still exist. If I run it again, it's perfectly fine, and we can see it printed out 0 because at this point, I is 0. Var has something called function scope, but since we're not using functions in any of our programs for grade 10, basically it means that it exists everywhere. Okay? So let means that variable only exists inside the brackets. Var means, at least for us, that it exists everywhere. That can be a useful thing to do because sometimes you want to use the same variable name in multiple parts of your code. So we can use let to declare it multiple times without having it overlap with each other. But if we use var, then we have to use this. We're using the same variable, and that could possibly lead to some issues. But that's the difference between the two. We use let for loops because almost always we don't want to use that variable after that loop. Okay? There are 2 additional things that are useful in loops, and that is continue and break. Let's take a look at how both of them work. So, I'm going to use an if statement here. If, let's say, I is equal to 4, I'm going to run some code. And the code I'm going to run is, simply break. Just like that. What break does is it says, even if the loop should still be running, this works for both a while loop and a for loop. If that loop is still supposed to be running, ignore that, exit the loop anyways. So I'm keeping this loop the same. It's going to count down 10, 8, 6, 4. When it is 4, it's going to stop, even though this should continue to 2. There we go. So break is a way to exit a loop early, even if it's supposed to keep on going. Usually it's a good idea to write your loops so that they exit on their own, but sometimes it is useful to use break to exit early. The other command is continue. And I'm going to do the same sort of thing, but I'm going to just move it up here. And this time I'm going to do continue. What continue does is it says stop the current iteration of the loop. Don't stop the loop, but the current iteration of the loop. Go back to the beginning and start the next iteration. So by doing this, it's still going to do 10, 9, 8, or 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. But when it's 4, it's going to stop, go back to the beginning, and continue for 2. It's not going to print out the value of I equals 4 because it's going to get stopped by this continue. So if I run this, and we can see it does the same thing as before. It stops at the same point, but when it got to 4, this continue stopped it from moving on to the next line of code and said go back and now do it for 2. So continue is not used as often, but it can be a useful tool as well. Both break and continue work for loops and while loops. So you can use these in either kind of loop. As long as it's a loop, they'll both do the same thing. Break will always exit that loop. Continue will always stop that current iteration of the loop, go back to the beginning, start the next one. This can be, yeah. So those are how loops work. There's not really any other fancy loops. There is a do while loop, but I would recommend avoiding doing that because they're typically a little bit messy to work with and a little bit harder to follow. Stick with while loops and for loops. Those exist everywhere. And we'll stop the video there. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.